Elon Musk didn't wake up one morning and decide to casually buy Twitter. This started because he was pissed. For years, Musk used Twitter as if it belonged to him. He announced products there, joked there, argued there, and moved markets there. It wasn't just an app, it was where his influence lived in real time, until Twitter reminded him it wasn't his platform. Some of his tweets were flagged, some were restricted, some were removed, and that's where this video begins. Because this isn't just about expensive things billionaires bought, it's about ego purchases. Moments where a billionaire is told no, hits resistance, or feels challenged, and instead of backing down, they escalate with money. Elon Musk's response to Twitter's censorship wasn't quiet. He didn't leave the platform. He didn't build a competitor. He escalated. Publicly, he attacked Twitter's leadership, accused the platform of censorship, and framed it as an authority that shouldn't exist. While everyone was watching the tweets, Musk was doing something else. He was buying shares. By early 2022, Musk had accumulated more than 9% of Twitter, instantly becoming its largest individual shareholder. Twitter's response was to invite him onto the board, a move designed to absorb the threat, bring him inside the system, and place limits on how much control he could have. Musk declined. That's the moment this stopped being theoretical, because joining the board would have meant rules. It would have meant caps. It would have meant restraint. Instead, Musk walked away, and days later, made an offer to buy all of Twitter. The price was $54.20 per share. That number wasn't accidental. Musk had already tied 420 to past jokes, controversies, and even SEC fines. By choosing 54.20, he turned the offer itself into a statement. It wasn't just a valuation, it was a message. You tried to control me. Let's see if you can stop this. Twitter's board initially resisted. Defensive measures were put in place. Executives questioned whether Musk was serious. Many assumed this was posturing, another public stunt. It wasn't. Musk had already lined up financing, personal cash, bank backing, Tesla stock as collateral. He wasn't negotiating from curiosity. He was negotiating from leverage. And eventually, Twitter folded. In a matter of months, Elon Musk went from being a user whose tweets were moderated to the person who owned the platform, doing the moderating. Not because he planned it years in advance, because he refused to accept the boundary. And once the deal closed, the escalation didn't stop. Executives were fired, policies were rewritten, entire systems of moderation were dismantled or replaced. This wasn't subtle, it wasn't quiet. It was Musk doing the same thing he always does when someone tells him no. He removes their ability to say it again. And this is where the pattern starts, because Elon Musk didn't buy Twitter to make money. He bought it because resistance exists, and money, to him, is how resistance gets erased. And the next story proves that this mindset isn't unique to him. It's how billionaire ego scales. When someone says no, Mark Zuckerberg didn't want a bigger house. He wanted privacy at scale. By the early 2000s, Zuckerberg had already accepted something most people never experienced. There is no such thing as a private home. Once your net worth and visibility reach a certain level, paparazzi, drones, tour buses, curious neighbors. Even when you buy a large property, the world still exists just beyond the fence. So Zuckerberg looked into building a much larger, more secure compound. And that's where the problem started. Local zoning rules and community resistance made it clear that a single, massive, walled-off estate wasn't going to be approved quietly. Oversized construction draws attention. Attention draws hearings. Hearings draw restrictions. The answer he got wasn't a dramatic rejection. It was worse. Limits, conditions, compromises. And Zuckerberg doesn't solve problems by compromising. So instead of fighting the city directly, he changed the problem. He started buying the houses around it, one by one. Zuckerberg quietly purchased neighboring properties near his own home. Not mansions, normal houses. Homes owned by people who suddenly received offers far above market value. As each sale closed, another buffer appeared between Zuckerberg and the outside world. What couldn't be approved as one giant compound was perfectly legal as multiple private residences. Over time, the footprint grew. Paths were added. Security zones overlapped. Sightlines disappeared. Individually, each house looked normal. Together, they functioned as something else entirely. A private, open-air estate, assembled piece by piece. From the street, nothing looked unusual. From above, it was obvious. This wasn't a neighborhood anymore. It was a perimeter. Zuckerberg never made a public announcement about it. He didn't argue with city officials. He didn't complain about zoning laws. He didn't push for exceptions. He just paid until the rules stopped mattering. And that's the ego in it. Not I want the biggest house, but I don't need permission if I don't ask. When the system told him there was a limit to how large his property could be, he didn't challenge the limit. He bought around it. The result wasn't a mansion. It was something far more deliberate. Control over space without ever technically breaking a rule. And once you see that move, you start noticing the pattern everywhere else in this because some billionaires respond to resistance by pushing harder. Others respond by making resistance irrelevant. Bill Gates didn't buy Leonardo da Vinci's Codex Leicester because he wanted art on his wall. He bought it because he wanted ownership of intellect. In 1994, the Codex Leicester, a 500-year-old notebook written by Leonardo da Vinci, went up for auction. This wasn't a painting. It wasn't decorative. It was 72 pages of raw thought. Observations about water, astronomy, geology, light, and motion, written entirely in da Vinci's mirrored handwriting. It was the closest thing to owning the private mental workspace of the most celebrated polymath in history, and Gates wanted it. At the time, there was an unspoken expectation in the academic and museum world. Manuscripts like this belonged in institutions, preserved, archived, studied behind glass, not owned outright by a private individual, especially not someone from the tech world. Gates ignored that expectation completely. He outbid everyone and bought the Codex for $30.8 million, making it the most expensive book ever sold at auction at the time. But the ego wasn't the purchase. It was what he did next. Instead of locking the Codex away, Gates had it digitized in extreme detail. Each page was scanned, analyzed, translated, and broken down. Individual drawings and notes were separated, reorganized, and converted into digital assets. Then Gates did something no collector or museum would ever consider. He used pieces of Leonardo da Vinci's private note as Windows screensavers. Not replicas, not interpretations. The actual pages. Millions of computers around the world idled on desktops displaying fragments of Leonardo's thoughts, controlled, distributed, and framed through Microsoft's operating system. This wasn't preservation, it was absorption. The message wasn't "I respect genius." It was "I can take genius apart, modernize it, and ship it at scale." Owning the Codex wasn't enough. Gates wanted it integrated, removed from the slow pace of academia, and inserted into the infrastructure of modern computing. He didn't argue with museums, he didn't ask permission, he didn't debate who deserved custody. He bought the artifact outright and then decided how the world would see it. And that's the ego move. Not a flex for attention, not a trophy for status, but a quiet statement that knowledge itself, even the work of history's greatest mind, becomes just another system when you're powerful enough to own it. Larry Ellison didn't buy a vacation home in Hawaii, he bought control. In 2012, Ellison quietly purchased roughly 98% of the island of Lanai, a 141 square mile island with its own towns, infrastructure, utilities, and population. The price was reported at around $300 million, but the number barely mattered. What mattered was what the purchase replaced. Before Ellison, Lanai was owned largely by a single company. Development was slow, decisions were political, change required consensus, hearings, and approvals. Like most places, progress was negotiated. Ellison doesn't negotiate well with friction. Almost immediately after the purchase, plans began to change. Infrastructure upgrades, water systems, energy projects, tourism overhauls. Some residents were hopeful, others were alarmed. Locals raised concerns about water usage, development priorities, and what it meant for one person to own almost everything around them. Ellison listened, and then he kept buying. More land, more control, more leverage. The criticism wasn't subtle. People questioned whether a billionaire should be able to reshape an entire island, whether decisions affecting thousands of lives should be centralized under one owner's vision, whether Ellison's plans actually aligned with what the community wanted. Ellison never publicly argued back. He didn't need to, because ownership changes the conversation. Zoning debates become internal planning. Public negotiations become private decisions. Resistance turns into logistics. Ellison framed the purchase as an experiment, a chance to rebuild the island sustainably, efficiently, and according to modern standards. And in some ways, that was true. But the deeper reality was simpler. He didn't want a seat at the table. He wanted the table. Buying the island meant never having to ask permission again. No city council to convince. No landlord to appease. No higher authority to slow things down. Every improvement, mistake, or overhaul would happen on his timeline. And that's the ego purchase. Not because it was extravagant, but because when faced with disagreement and complexity, Ellison didn't try to work within the system. He replaced the system with ownership. And once you cross that threshold, once resistance is no longer something you encounter, but something you absorb, the scale of ego stops being personal. It becomes geographic. The yacht Axioma wasn't supposed to become an ego story. It was supposed to be a liquidation. In 2022, the 236-foot super yacht was seized after its owner defaulted on massive loans. This wasn't a private sale. This wasn't discreet billionaire networking. It was a rare thing in the ultra-wealthy world. A public auction for a fully built, turnkey super yacht. That alone made it dangerous, because auctions don't reward patience, they reward dominance. The yacht entered the auction with an estimated value around $75 million, but early bids came in far lower. On paper, this looked like a deal, a distressed asset, a chance for someone to quietly steal a floating palace at a discount. That's not what happened. As the auction progressed, bidders didn't drop out. They stacked, one bid after another, then another, then another. By the time it ended, there had been 63 bids. Not inquiries, not negotiations. Bids. At that point, the price didn't matter anymore. This wasn't about what the yacht was worth. It was about refusing to be the person who backed down. Every new bid wasn't a calculation. It was a response. Someone else is still in, so I stay in. Someone raised it again, so I raise it back. The final sale price landed at roughly $37.5 million, far below the yacht's original valuation. But that number misses the point entirely. What made Axioma special wasn't the discount. It was the behavior. 63 times, someone chose escalation over restraint, and the winner didn't walk away with a bargain. They walked away with proof that in a room full of people who could all afford to stop, they didn't. Unlike the other stories in this video, there was no long-term plan here. No zoning laws to work around, no regulators to defy, no rival to outperform strategically, just raw competitive ego, a public arena, a visible countdown, and a refusal to lose. That's why Axioma belongs here, because when you strip away ideology, legacy, and long-term vision, this is what ego looks like in its purest form. Staying in the fight simply because someone else hasn't left yet, and once you see that instinct clearly, the next stories hit differently, because not all ego is impulsive. Some of it is quiet, some of it is calculated, and some of it is designed to leave a message long after the purchase is finished. Ken Griffin didn't buy his New York penthouse because he needed somewhere to live. He bought it because of when he bought it. For decades, Griffin had been one of the most powerful figures in finance, running Citadel from Chicago. But over time, his relationship with the city deteriorated. Political tension, tax policy, public criticism. The environment became hostile enough that Griffin made a very public decision. He moved. Citadel announced it would relocate its headquarters from Chicago to Miami, a move that sent an unmistakable signal. Jobs were leaving, capital was leaving, influence was leaving, and then Griffin made another purchase, this time in New York. In 2019, Griffin paid $238 million for a penthouse at 220 Central Park South. It instantly became the most expensive home ever sold in the United States. The timing mattered. This wasn't a childhood dream home. It wasn't a retreat. It wasn't even meant to be lived in full time. It was a record. The building itself was already symbolic. An ultra-luxury tower overlooking Central Park, designed to cater exclusively to the highest tier of wealth. But Griffin didn't just buy into the building. He bought the top. The purchase shattered every previous residential sale in the country, and Griffin didn't accompany it with press tours or interviews. There was no public explanation, no justification, no attempt to soften the message, because the message didn't need explaining. After leaving one city under political friction, Griffin reappeared elsewhere, holding the highest possible score. Not just wealthy, unignorable. This wasn't about square footage. It wasn't about amenities. It was about visibility. When billionaires make statements quietly, they still echo. Buying the most expensive home in the country immediately after relocating wasn't coincidence. It was punctuation, a way of closing one chapter and opening another without saying a word. And that's the ego purchase. Not loud, not emotional, but surgical. Because sometimes the most effective response to resistance isn't escalation or confrontation. It's proving permanently that you're operating on a level the argument can't touch. Elon Musk doesn't fight regulators head on. He goes around them. For years, Tesla's primary factory was in Fremont, California, a state known for strict labor rules, environmental oversight, and slow-moving approval processes. As Tesla grew, those constraints became more visible. Inspections increased. Oversight tightened. Friction became routine. Then COVID hit. In 2020, local authorities ordered Tesla's Fremont factory to shut down along with other non-essential operations. Musk publicly rejected the order, mocked officials, and threatened to move Tesla out of California entirely. At the time, many people treated it like another Musk outburst. Loud, dramatic, but temporary. It wasn't. Behind the scenes, Musk was already accelerating something much larger. He had begun pouring billions of dollars into new gigafactories in states with fewer restrictions, faster approvals, and governments eager to accommodate him. Texas, Nevada, later, additional expansion elsewhere. These weren't satellite facilities. They were massive, vertically integrated production hubs designed to replace California's central role entirely. When California said, "You can't operate like this," Musk didn't negotiate policy. He relocated gravity. The Texas Gigafactory wasn't subtle. It was enormous, fast-tracked, and publicly celebrated. Local officials welcomed it. Permits moved quickly. Construction accelerated. Musk didn't just move operations. He demonstrated that entire regulatory environments were optional if you had enough capital and speed. Eventually, Tesla moved its headquarters to Texas. The message was unmistakable. Rules don't slow Musk down. They just determine where he builds next. This wasn't about efficiency alone. California still had talent, infrastructure, history, but Musk wanted something else. Freedom from friction, and when the system would have bent, he built somewhere it didn't need to. That's the ego purchase. Not one asset, not one building, but an entire industrial network designed to outrun oversight. Because for Musk, resistance isn't something to argue with. It's a signal to change terrain. And once you're wealthy enough to move industries, instead of negotiating with them, ego stops being personal. It becomes geographic. Mukesh Ambani didn't build a house. He built a statement that ignored gravity. In Mumbai, one of the most densely populated cities on Earth, land is scarce, vertical space is regulated, and inequality is impossible to hide. Building anything massive invites scrutiny. Building something unprecedented guarantees it. Ambani did it anyway. The result was Antilia, a 27-story private residence designed for a single family, rising over the city like an office tower with no offices, no tenants, no commercial space, just one household occupying what looks like a skyscraper. From the moment construction began, criticism followed. Urban planners questioned how a structure like this fit into zoning logic. Activists criticized the symbolism. Locals questioned the ethics of building a vertical palace in a city where millions live in extreme density just blocks away. Ambani didn't respond. He kept building. Antilia includes multiple helipads, ballrooms, private theaters, gardens suspended hundreds of feet in the air, entire floors dedicated to staff, and infrastructure systems designed to function independently of the city around it. The reported cost reached roughly $2 billion, making it one of the most expensive private residences ever built. But the money isn't the point, the defiance is. In a city that forces most people to compress their lives into smaller and smaller spaces, Ambani expanded vertically. When the environment said there is no room, he responded by stacking space on top of itself. This wasn't an accident of wealth, it was a decision. He could have built multiple estates. He could have spread properties across continents. Instead, he built one structure so tall and singular that it could not be ignored. And despite years of criticism, Antillia still stands exactly as planned. No redesign, no retreat, no apology. That's the ego purchase. Not because it's expensive, but because it exists as a permanent answer to the idea that scale has limits. When space runs out horizontally, you go vertical, and when you're powerful enough, no one gets to tell you how high is too high. At a certain point, ego stops needing resistance. That point is the Sultan of Brunei. For decades, the Sultan quietly assembled what is widely considered the largest and most valuable private car collection ever created. Estimates range from $3 to $5 billion, covering more than 7,000 vehicles. But even those numbers don't fully capture what made this different. This wasn't about collecting cars that existed. It was about creating cars that didn't. During the height of his spending, major manufacturers were told certain models could not be sold to the public. Limited runs, prototype-only designs, concept vehicles meant to be seen, not owned. So the Sultan removed the restriction. Ferrari, Bugatti, Bentley, Rolls-Royce. Manufacturers were commissioned to build one-off versions exclusively for him. Custom body styles, unique interiors, variants that never appeared in catalogs and never would again. Some of these cars were never driven, some were never displayed, some were barely seen outside the factory floor. They existed simply because he wanted them to. No zoning laws to bypass, no regulators to outrun, no rivals to defeat. Just the quiet reality that when money reaches a certain scale, the concept of no disappears entirely. The Sultan didn't buy cars to prove a point. He bought them because there was no one left to prove anything to. That's why this story ends here, because the earlier ego purchases were reactions. Someone said no, someone pushed back, someone imposed a limit, and by the time you reach this level, there are no limits left to push against. Only ownership, only accumulation, only silence. And that's the final form of billionaire ego, not defiance, but absence of resistance altogether.